I'm freezing. Let me stay with you, I beg you. I'll reward you, promised the poor orc woman. The wind howled like a dying beast across the frozen mountains, carrying with it a cold so brutal it could strip the flesh from bone. Snow fell in thick, merciless sheets, burying the narrow forest path beneath layers of white death. And somewhere in that frozen hell, a figure stumbled forward, each step a battle against the storm that wanted nothing more than to claim another victim. Grishka had survived 17 winters in the Bloodfang Mountains. She had faced down rival war bands, hunted ice bears with nothing but a rusted axe, and earned her warrior's scars before she'd seen her 20th summer. Her green skin, marked with the deep emerald hue of the northern orc clans, had weathered blizzards that would have killed lesser warriors. The tribal tattoos that snaked up her massive arms, symbols of her ancestors, had been carved into her flesh during the ritual of blood and ice when she was barely old enough to hold a blade. But this storm was different. Grishka's leather armor, reinforced with iron plates salvaged from a dozen battles, offered little protection against the supernatural cold that seemed to seep into her very bones. Her long black hair, usually braided in the warrior's style of her clan, now hung in frozen strands against her face, each breath visible in the air like the ghost of her failing strength. At 7 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry a full-grown deer, she had always been a force of nature. Her hands, each one large enough to crush a human skull, now trembled as she clutched her torn cloak tighter around her body. The ambush had come 3 days ago. A rival clan, desperate and starving, had attacked her hunting party in the dead of night. Grishka had fought like the warrior she was, her axe singing through the air, her war cry echoing across the frozen wasteland. But they had been outnumbered. Her brothers and sisters had fallen one by one, their blood staining the pristine snow crimson. She had escaped barely, with nothing but the torn clothes on her back and wounds that refused to stop bleeding. Now, as the blizzard intensified, she knew the truth with the clarity that comes only when death whispers in your ear. She was going to die out here. Through the curtain of snow, a light flickered in the distance. Warm, golden, impossible. Grishka's yellow eyes, dulled by exhaustion and cold, struggled to focus. Was it real? Or was her mind playing cruel tricks as it prepared to surrender to the ice? She forced her legs to move, each step in agony, her massive frame swaying as hypothermia began to claim her. The light grew brighter, clearer, not a hallucination. A building, human architecture, stone walls, wooden beams, glass windows glowing with the promise of heat and life. An inn. A human inn, tucked into the mountains where the trade road cut through orc territory. Grishka's pride, the fierce warrior's honor that had sustained her through countless battles, screamed at her to turn away. Humans were the enemy. They had driven her people from the fertile valleys, called them monsters, savages, beasts. To beg shelter from a human was to betray everything her clan stood for. But as another gust of wind nearly knocked her off her feet, as she felt the numbness creeping up from her toes toward her heart, pride seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. She stumbled toward the door, her legs barely holding her weight. Up close, the building was larger than she'd thought. A 2-story stone structure with smoke curling from twin chimneys, the windows blazing with firelight. Through the frosted glass, she could see movement, people, warmth, life. Grishka raised one massive fist and pounded on the wooden door, the sound barely audible over the screaming wind. Once, twice. Her strength was fading fast. She pounded again, harder, the wood groaning under the force of her desperate strikes. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. Then louder, in broken common tongue, the language of humans that tasted like ash on her tongue. "I'm freezing. Let me stay with you, I beg you." The door remained closed. Panic gripped her chest. "Please, anyone." Her massive hands hammered against the wood with the last reserves of her strength. "I'll reward you. I promise. Just, please." Her legs gave out. Grishka, who had never knelt before any warrior, who had stood tall even when facing death, collapsed to her knees in the snow, her vision blurred. The cold was inside her now, a living thing consuming her from within. She slumped against the door, her green skin turning pale, her breath coming in shallow gasps. This was it. After all the battles, all the victories, she would die begging at a human's door. The door opened. Warm air rushed over her like a blessing from the ancestor spirits. Grishka looked up, her vision swimming, and saw a figure silhouetted against the golden firelight. A human man, tall by human standards but still nearly 2 feet shorter than her even on her knees. Brown beard, gray eyes wide with shock, simple wool tunic and leather apron. In his hands, a woodcutter's axe, raised defensively. By the gods, the man breathed, staring at the collapsed orc warrior at his threshold. What in the hells? Please, Grishka managed, her accent thick, her words slurred by cold and desperation. I die, out here. Let me stay, just until storm passes. The man, Aldrich, innkeeper of the Mountain's Rest, widower for 3 years, and a man who prided himself on following the old laws of hospitality, stood frozen in indecision. Every instinct screamed danger. Orcs meant death. Everyone knew that. The kingdom and the orc clans had been at war for generations. To shelter one was treason. To let one into your home was suicide. But as he looked down at the dying warrior, this massive, terrifying creature reduced to begging in the snow, he saw something that cut through his fear. Desperation. Real, raw, human desperation, though there was nothing human about the woman slowly freezing to death on his doorstep. I'll reward you, Grishka whispered, her eyes fluttering closed. I promise. I have gold. From raids. Hidden. Safe. I'll tell you. Where? Just let me live. Aldrich's grip tightened on his axe. Behind him, the inn was empty. The storm had kept all travelers away. No one would know. He could close the door, let nature take its course. It would be the safe choice, the smart choice. But as another gust of wind sent snow swirling into his warm inn, carrying with it the smell of pine and ice and something else, blood, he realized she was bleeding. Aldrich made a choice that would change everything. Damn it all, he muttered, setting down the axe. He grabbed the orc woman under her arms. Gods, she was heavy, solid muscle even in her weakened state, and dragged her inside. The moment Grishka crossed the threshold, feeling the warmth of the crackling fireplace against her frozen skin, she let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Aldrich kicked the door shut against the storm and looked down at the impossible sight before him. A 7-foot-tall orc warrior, complete with prominent tusks jutting from her lower jaw, green skin marked with battle scars and tribal tattoos, sprawled on his floor like a fallen titan. What have I done? He whispered to himself. Grishka's eyes opened, meeting his. Thank you. And in that moment, as the fire cast dancing shadows across her face, this creature that should have been his enemy, Aldrich saw not a monster, but a person, someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone who simply didn't want to die alone in the cold. Don't thank me yet, Aldrich said, his voice gruff as he grabbed blankets from the linen closet. We need to get you warm before you freeze to death in here. He worked quickly, his hands trembling. From fear or cold, he couldn't say. He piled blankets over her massive frame, then moved to the fire, adding more wood until the flames roared. The heat in the room became almost oppressive, but he didn't care. Hypothermia was a killer, and gods help him. He'd decided to fight it. Grishka's shivering intensified as her body began to thaw, a good sign. She tried to sit up, but Aldrich pushed her back down with surprising firmness. Stay down. You're in no condition to move. My wounds, she managed, gesturing weakly to her side. For the first time, Aldrich noticed the blood seeping through her leather armor. He hesitated. Tending her wounds meant getting closer, touching her, trusting that she wouldn't snap his neck the moment she regained her strength. But he'd already crossed the line by letting her in. Might as well see it through. I'll need to remove your armor, he said, reaching for the leather straps. Grishka nodded weakly. As Aldrich worked the buckles, his human hands small and clumsy compared to her massive frame, he couldn't help but notice the details he'd missed in his panic. The intricate patterns of her tattoos, each one telling a story in the pictographic language of her people. The old scars crisscrossing her arms and shoulders, silver against green, souvenirs of battles she'd survived. The way her skin up close wasn't just green, but a complex tapestry of emerald, olive, and forest hues, like the deep woods after rain. The wound on her side was deep, a blade thrust that had missed vital organs by inches. Aldrich grabbed his medical supplies. He kept a well-stocked kit for injured travelers and began to clean the wound with practiced efficiency. Years of running an inn on a dangerous mountain pass had taught him basic field medicine. Grishka hissed in pain as he pressed a cloth soaked in strong spirits against the gash, her tusks catching the firelight. Sorry, Aldrich muttered. This will sting. I've had worse, she said, and despite everything, there was a hint of warrior's pride in her voice. As Aldrich stitched the wound closed, his stitches neat and small, learned from his late wife who had been the daughter of a healer, he felt the absurdity of the situation wash over him. Here he was, a simple innkeeper, sewing up an orc warrior in his parlor while a blizzard raged outside. If anyone from the village saw this, he'd be executed for treason. "What's your name?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. "Grishka," she replied, her voice stronger now that warmth was returning to her body. "Of the Bloodfang clan." "Aldrich," he said, "owner of this establishment." He tied off the final stitch and sat back. "There. That should hold, but you'll need rest. Real rest, not just a few hours." Grishka's yellow eyes studied him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why what? Why help me? I am orc. You are human. We are enemies." Aldrich was quiet for a long moment, wrapping bandages around her torso. His hands looked tiny against her massive frame, like a child's hands against an adult's. "My wife," he said finally, "used to say that hospitality was sacred, that the gods judged us not by how we treated those who could reward us, but by how we treated those who needed us most." He secured the bandage and met her eyes. "I may regret this. Probably will, but I won't have your death on my conscience." Something shifted in Grishka's expression. Her features, which had been hardened by pain and cold, softened into something almost vulnerable. "Your wife, she was wise." "She was," Aldrich said quietly. "She died 3 winters ago. Fever took her." He stood abruptly, as if uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "You need food. When did you last eat?" 4 days, Grishka admitted. Aldrich shook his head and headed to the kitchen. As he prepared a simple stew, potatoes, salted pork, winter vegetables, nothing fancy but hot and filling, he kept glancing back at his unexpected guest. She had managed to pull herself into a sitting position, her back against the wall, the blankets wrapped around her shoulders. Even weakened, even wounded, she was imposing. He tried to imagine her in battle, that massive frame wielding a war axe, those powerful legs carrying her across a battlefield, that voice raised in a war cry. He tried to imagine her as the enemy, but all he could see was someone who had knocked on his door, begging not to die. He brought her the bowl of stew and watched as her large hands that could easily crush the wooden bowl, cradled it with surprising gentleness. She ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a feast. When she finished, she looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "The reward I promised," she said. "It's real. 2 days south, near the fallen pine, there's a cave. Inside, buried beneath the black stone, there are 3 bags of gold, raided from a merchant caravan, enough to live well for many years." Aldrich stared at her. "You'd really tell me where your treasure is, just for one night's shelter?" "You gave me my life," Grishka said simply. "In my clan, a life debt is absolute. What is gold compared to that?" "I don't want your gold," Aldrich heard himself say. "Keep it. Buy supplies when the storm passes. Start over somewhere." Grishka's eyes widened. In her world, in the harsh reality of the Bloodfang Mountains, where every resource was fought over, where tribes raided each other for scraps, the concept of refusing treasure was incomprehensible. "I don't understand. Humans love gold. You risk death for gold." "Some of us do," Aldrich agreed. "But some of us just want to run our inns in peace, make an honest living, and sleep at night knowing we did right by our fellow creatures." He sat down in the chair across from her, suddenly exhausted. "The storm should pass by morning. You can rest here tonight, heal up. But when dawn comes, you need to leave. If the villagers find out I sheltered an orc, they will kill you." Grishka finished. "I understand." She was quiet for a moment. "Your village, they hate my kind?" "Fear," Aldrich corrected. "They fear orcs. The war has been going on for so long, most don't even remember how it started. They just know that orcs raid the outer farms, that the army is always recruiting to fight the clans up north. Fear turns to hate pretty easily. My clan fears humans too," Grishka said softly. "We tell stories of human armies burning our settlements, taking our children as slaves, pushing us into the frozen wastes where nothing grows. Fear and hate. Perhaps they are the same thing. Outside, the wind howled its ancient song. Inside, human and orc sat in silence, each contemplating the strange truth that the enemy, up close, looked a lot like a person trying to survive in a cruel world. Aldrich showed Grishka to the small storage room on the ground floor, safer than the guest rooms upstairs, easier to hide if someone came calling. He brought her more blankets, a pillow, even a spare set of clean clothes, though they'd never fit her massive frame. "Rest," he said. "I'll keep watch." "Aldrich," Grishka called as he turned to leave. When he looked back, she continued in halting common. "Your wife, she taught you well. You have honor. That is, rare, in human or orc." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and closed the door. But sleep did not come easily for Aldrich that night. He sat in his chair by the fire, his father's old sword across his lap, just in case, and watched the flames dance. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind made his heart jump. What had he done? Sheltering an enemy combatant could get him hanged. The penalty for aiding orcs was death. No exceptions, no mercy. And yet, when he closed his eyes, he kept seeing her face. Not the green skin or the tusks or the scars. Just her eyes. Yellow like a wolf's, yes, but filled with the same desperate hope he'd seen in his own mirror the winter his wife had died. Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside, two souls from opposite sides of an ancient war found an uneasy peace. Dawn came gray and cold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world buried in pristine white. Aldrich woke to find Grishka already awake, standing by the window, staring out at the transformed landscape. She had wrapped herself in the largest blanket he owned, but even so, it barely covered her broad shoulders. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Better," she said. "The warmth, the food, the rest. You saved my life, Aldrich of Mountain's Rest." "Then we're even," he said, though they both knew it wasn't true. "The path should be passable by midday. You should leave before then, before anyone sees." Grishka turned to face him, and in the morning light, he could see her more clearly. Despite her injuries, despite the hardships that had marked her body with scars, there was a dignity to her. She stood like a warrior, shoulders back, chin raised, but her eyes were sad. "I will leave," she agreed. But first, she reached into her armor, which Aldrich had carefully dried by the fire overnight, and pulled out something small, a carved piece of bone strung on a leather cord. The carving was intricate, a wolf's head, done in the style of orc craftsmen. "This belonged to my mother," Grishka said. "She was a wise woman of our clan, a healer. This totem, it represents protection, safe passage through danger." She held it out to him. "I want you to have it." Aldrich stared at the offering. "Grishka, I can't." "Please," she interrupted. "I have no gold here." "No way to repay your kindness. But this is worth more than gold to my people. It carries my mother's spirit. It will protect you." Slowly, reverently, Aldrich took the totem. It was warm in his hand, smoothed by years of wear. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the wolf's eyes seeming almost alive. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I'll treasure it." They stood there for a moment, human and orc, on opposite sides of a war neither of them had started, connected by one night of simple mercy. A knock at the door shattered the moment like glass. Aldrich's blood turned to ice. Grishka's hand instinctively went to her axe, which Aldrich had also dried and returned to her. Their eyes met in shared panic. "Aldrich!" a woman's voice called from outside. "Aldrich, open up! It's Maren!" Maren, the village headwoman. Of all the people who could have come calling. "Hide!" Aldrich hissed to Grishka. "The storage room! Now! Don't make a sound!" Grishka moved with surprising stealth for her size, slipping into the storage room and closing the door, just as Aldrich opened the front entrance. Maren stood on his doorstep, bundled in furs, her sharp eyes sweeping the interior of the inn. She was a tall woman by human standards, lean and hard from a life in the mountains, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Behind her stood two village men, both carrying crossbows. "Maren," Aldrich said, forcing his voice to remain calm. "What brings you out in this cold?" "Tracks," Maren said, pushing past him into the inn. "Large tracks in the snow, leading straight to your door. Tracks too big to be human." Aldrich's heart hammered. Probably a bear. The storm drove all sorts of animals down from the high peaks. A bear that walks on two legs? Maren's eyes narrowed. "Don't play me for a fool, Aldrich. Those were orc tracks. I've seen enough of them in my years." "Even if they were," Aldrich said carefully, "they lead to my door, not away from it. Whatever it was, I didn't let it in." Maren walked through the inn, her boots clicking on the wooden floor. She inspected the fireplace, noting the excessive amount of ash. He'd burned a lot of wood last night. She touched the pot on the stove, still slightly warm. Her eyes landed on the pile of blankets by the fire, far more than one man would need. "You're lying," she said flatly. She gestured to her men. "Search the building." "Marin, this is my property. This is kingdom law," Marin interrupted. "Aiding the enemy is treason. If you've sheltered an orc, Aldrich, you'll hang for it. I'm giving you one chance to tell the truth." The two men spread out, crossbows raised, one headed for the stairs, the other toward the storage room. Aldrich's mind raced. If they found Grishka, they'd kill her on sight. Then they'd arrest him. His life would be over. Everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for, gone. All because he couldn't let someone freeze to death. The man reached the storage room door. "Wait," Aldrich said, his voice loud in the sudden silence. "I'll tell you everything." Marin raised a hand, stopping her men. "I'm listening." Aldrich took a breath. This was it. The moment where he chose between his safety and his conscience. His late wife's voice echoed in his memory. "The gods judge us not by how we treat those who can reward us, but by how we treat those who need us most." "Yes," he said clearly. "There was an orc here, a warrior, wounded and freezing. She begged for shelter. I gave her food, tended her wounds, and let her rest by the fire. And when dawn came, she left." He met Marin's eyes. "She's gone now. Headed back to her clan, I imagine." It wasn't entirely a lie. Grishka would be leaving. Just not yet. Marin studied him for a long moment. "Show me the storage room." "There's nothing in there but supplies," Aldrich protested. "Then you won't mind showing me." Aldrich's shoulders slumped in defeat. He walked to the storage room door and opened it. The room was empty. Blankets folded neatly in the corner. Supplies stacked on shelves. No 7-foot-tall orc warrior anywhere to be seen. Marin pushed past him, checking every corner, every shadow. Nothing. She turned to him, suspicion warring with confusion on her face. "Where did she go?" "I told you," Aldrich said, allowing himself a small breath of relief. "She left at dawn." But even as he said it, he wondered how, where. Grishka had been here just moments ago. There was no other exit from the storage room, no windows large enough for her to fit through. Marin wasn't satisfied, but without evidence, there was little she could do. "If I find out you're lying, Aldrich, if I discover you're helping the enemy, I'll see you hanged myself. Understood?" "Understood," Aldrich said. After Marin and her men left, Aldrich stood alone in his inn, his heart still pounding. He walked to the storage room, looked around carefully, and then he saw it. A piece of torn blanket caught on a nail near the back wall. He pulled on it, and the wall shifted. A hidden door, of course. The inn was old, built during the last war. Secret passages were common back then, built to hide from raiding parties. He'd forgotten about this one, boarded up decades ago. But someone strong enough, someone with the raw power of an orc, could have forced it open. Aldrich followed the narrow passage, emerging into the forest behind the inn. There, in the snow, he found Grishka waiting, her axe slung over her shoulder, her face grim. "I'm sorry," she said. "I heard everything. I didn't mean to bring trouble to you." "You found the old passage," Aldrich said. "The wood was weak. I pushed hard." She looked guilty. "I will pay for the damage." "Despite everything," Aldrich laughed. The sound was slightly hysterical. "You just saved both our lives and you're worried about property damage?" Grishka didn't smile. "That woman, Marin, she will watch you now. I have made your life dangerous." "You didn't make anything dangerous," Aldrich said. "I chose to open that door. I'd do it again." "Why?" The question was raw, genuine. Why risk everything for someone you don't know? For an orc, Aldrich was quiet for a moment, looking at this warrior who had knocked on his door begging for her life, who had offered her treasure in payment, who now stood in the snow worried about repaying a debt. "Because," he said finally, "the war has taught us to see each other as monsters. But last night, I didn't see a monster. I saw someone who didn't want to die. And I couldn't close the door on that." Grishka's eyes shimmered. Not quite tears. Orcs didn't cry easily, but something close. "In all my years," she said softly, "I have never met a human like you, Aldrich. My clan would call you weak for your mercy. But I think you are the strongest person I have ever known. I'm just a man trying to do right," Aldrich said. "Nothing more. That is everything," Grishka replied. She turned to leave, then paused. "The totem I gave you. Keep it close. When you are in danger, hold it and think of me. I will know. And if I can, I will come." "You can't mean that. We'll probably never see each other again." "Perhaps," Grishka said. "But a life debt is absolute. You gave me my life, Aldrich of Mountain's Rest. That means my life is yours to call upon. should you ever need it. She touched her fist to her chest in what he recognized as an orc salute. Loktar, friend. And then she was gone, her massive form disappearing into the forest like a green shadow, leaving only tracks in the snow and an impossible memory. Aldrich stood there for a long time, holding the bone totem, watching the forest where she'd vanished. When he finally went back inside, the inn felt emptier than it had in 3 years. He went about his day, cleaning, preparing for the next traveler, restocking supplies, but his mind kept returning to those yellow eyes, that gruff voice, that impossible gratitude. Days passed, then weeks. Maren watched him carefully for a time, but eventually her attention shifted to other matters. Life in the village returned to its normal rhythm, but Aldrich found himself changed in small ways. When travelers spoke of orcs with casual hatred, calling them beasts and savages, he found himself biting his tongue, remembering Grishka's dignity, her honor, her concern for his safety even as she fled. He wore the bone totem under his shirt, hidden from view. It became a talisman of sorts, a reminder of the night he'd chosen compassion over fear. Winter deepened. The war continued as wars do. Distant battles fought by young men who'd never questioned why they were killing or dying. Aldrich ran his inn, welcomed travelers, and kept his secret. Then, one frozen night, 2 months later, they came. Bandits. 3 of them, desperate men driven from the lowlands by the war, preying on mountain travelers. They burst into the inn after midnight, blades drawn, demanding gold and food. Aldrich, woken from sleep, faced them with nothing but his father's old sword. He was a capable fighter. You had to be to survive on the mountain roads, but he was 1 against 3, and they were young and hungry and vicious. The leader's blade slashed across Aldrich's arm. Pain exploded through him. His sword clattered to the floor. The bandit raised his weapon for the killing blow. Aldrich's hand went to the totem around his neck. He didn't know why. Instinct. Desperation. The bone was warm against his palm. "Grishka," he whispered. The door exploded inward. The bandits turned, weapons raised, and froze in terror. In the doorway stood a nightmare made flesh. 7 feet of green-skinned fury, tribal tattoos seeming to writhe in the firelight, yellow eyes blazing, an axe the size of a man gripped in massive hands. Grishka's war cry shook the rafters. "Loktar!" The fight was over in seconds. She moved like lightning for something so large, her axe cleaving through the bandits' weapons like they were kindling. 2 fled screaming into the night. The leader tried to fight and found himself lifted off his feet by one massive hand, slammed against the wall with enough force to knock him unconscious. Then Grishka turned to Aldrich, her fury melting into concern. "You're hurt. You came," Aldrich gasped, clutching his bleeding arm. I didn't actually believe. "I told you," Grishka said, already tearing cloth for bandages with hands surprisingly gentle given their size. "Life debt. I felt your call." She began wrapping his wound with the same care he'd shown hers that night in the storm. "I was 3 days away hunting in the southern peaks. I ran without stopping." 3 days? Aldrich stared at her. "You ran for 3 days straight?" "Life debt," she repeated simply, as if that explained everything. As she finished binding his wound, Aldrich looked at her, really looked at her. This time not as a dying stranger, not as a patient, but as what she truly was. Someone who had traveled impossible distances because he'd needed help. Someone who had repaid kindness with absolute loyalty. "Stay," he heard himself say. "At least for tonight. It's not safe for you to travel in the dark, and Maren won't come calling at this hour." Grishka hesitated. "If I'm found here—" "I know the risks," Aldrich interrupted. "I'm asking anyway." So she stayed. They sat by the fire together, this unlikely pair, and talked. Really talked this time. Grishka spoke of her clan, of the harsh beauty of the Bloodfang Mountains, of the honor codes that governed orc society. She spoke of her mother, the healer, who had taught her that strength without compassion was just cruelty with muscle behind it. Aldrich spoke of his wife, of the inn, of his growing disillusionment with a war that seemed to have no purpose beyond perpetuating itself. He spoke of the loneliness that had settled over him like snow, cold and endless. "In my clan," Grishka said quietly, "we have a saying. The truest tribe is not the one you're born into, but the one you choose. I chose you, Aldrich, the night you opened your door. You are my tribe now, even if you are human, even if the world would call it madness." "The world calls a lot of things madness," Aldrich replied. "Doesn't make them wrong." As dawn approached, Grishka prepared to leave again, but this time it felt different. Not like a goodbye, but like a see you later. I'll come back, she said. When I can, if you'll have me. Always, Aldrich said, and meant it with a certainty that surprised him. Over the following months, Grishka became a regular visitor to Mountain's Rest. She came in the dead of night when the village slept and left before dawn. They developed a system. A certain pattern of smoke from the chimney meant it was safe. A different pattern meant danger. They talked for hours, these meetings in the dark. They shared meals. Aldrich learned to cook game the way Grishka's clan prepared it, with mountain herbs and fire roasting. Grishka learned to appreciate human bread and ale, though she insisted orc mead was superior. They became, against all odds and logic, friends. The villagers noticed changes in Aldrich. He seemed lighter somehow, less burdened. He smiled more. When Marin commented on it, he said he was simply learning to appreciate life again. It wasn't entirely a lie. One night, as winter gave way to early spring, Grishka arrived at the inn with news. "My clan is moving," she said, "farther north, away from human lands. The elders say the war is too costly. Better to retreat to the deep mountains than keep fighting." "You're leaving," Aldrich said, and tried to hide the disappointment in his voice. "My clan is leaving," Grishka corrected. "I haven't decided if I'm going with them." "Why would you stay? There's nothing for you here but danger." Grishka looked at him steadily. "There is you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Aldrich knew what she was saying, what she was offering. It was insane, impossible. A human and an orc, their people at war, living together in any capacity would be a death sentence for both of them. "You should go with your clan," he said finally, though it cost him. "It's safer. You'd have a real life, not this. Hiding in shadows." "I've lived my whole life in shadows," Grishka said. "Hiding from human armies, hiding from starvation, hiding from the cold. This," she gestured around the warm inn, "this is the first place I've ever felt like I could stop hiding." "Grishka, I know what you're going to say," she interrupted. "It's dangerous. It's forbidden. It can't last. You're right about all of it. But that night, when you opened your door, you showed me something I'd never seen before. Mercy without expectation of reward. Kindness without condition. In all my life of war and survival, I'd forgotten such things existed." Her yellow eyes were fierce. "I won't give that up, not unless you tell me to go." Aldrich was quiet for a long moment. He thought of his wife, of her teachings about hospitality and compassion. He thought of the bone totem around his neck, warm against his skin. He thought of all the nights Grishka had visited, all the conversations, all the unexpected laughter. He thought of how empty the inn would feel without her. "I can't promise you safety," he said finally. "I don't want safety," Grishka replied. "I want a tribe. I want to belong somewhere. Is that so wrong?" "No," Aldrich said quietly. "It's the most right thing I've ever heard." So Grishka stayed. Not in the inn, that would have been suicide, but in a cave system she'd found in the mountains nearby. Close enough to reach quickly, hidden enough to be safe. She and Aldrich developed a life together, strange and secret and entirely their own. She helped him with the heavy work around the inn, repairs that needed strength beyond human capability. He taught her to read common, using old books from his wife's collection. They shared meals, shared stories, shared a friendship that defied every law of their peoples. The seasons turned. The war continued. Distant thunder that sometimes grew closer. Aldrich became an expert at hiding all evidence of Grishka's presence. Grishka became an expert at moving unseen through the forest. They didn't speak of the future. The present was complicated enough. One evening, nearly a year after that first desperate night in the snow, they sat together by the fire. Outside, another winter storm raged, but this time Grishka was inside, warm and safe and welcome. "Do you ever regret it?" Aldrich asked. "That night, knocking on my door?" Grishka was quiet for a moment. "I regret the desperation that brought me here. I regret the wounds, the death of my war band, the harsh world that made such desperation necessary." She looked at him. "But I don't regret finding you. You gave me more than shelter, Aldrich. You gave me hope that the world could be different than what we've been taught." "Same," Aldrich said softly. "Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. My wife used to say I had a good heart, but I'd forgotten how to use it. You reminded me. Two broken people, different species, different worlds." Grishka mused. "By all logic, this shouldn't work." "Maybe that's exactly why it does," Aldrich replied. "We're not trying to fit into anyone's idea of how things should be. We're just being." Grishka smiled. a rare sight, but genuine. Her tusks caught the firelight. The orc and the innkeeper. Sounds like a bad tavern joke. It is a bad tavern joke, Aldrich agreed. But it's our joke. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, warmth and peace and something that felt a lot like home. If you're watching this story and feeling moved by the unlikely connection between Grishka and Aldrich, take a moment to reflect on your own life. How often do we close doors on people simply because they're different from us? How many potential friendships, how much potential understanding do we miss because we're too afraid to look past the surface? Subscribe to Orcbound Tales for more stories that challenge what we think we know about monsters and heroes, about enemies and friends. Like this video if you believe that compassion can bridge any divide, no matter how impossible it seems. The greatest rewards in life often come not from gold or glory, but from the simple act of opening a door when someone is freezing outside. Grishka's promise of reward led to something neither she nor Aldrich expected. Not treasure, but belonging. Not payment, but purpose. In a world that tells us to fear the different, to hate the enemy, to close our doors and protect only our own, maybe the bravest thing we can do is exactly what Aldrich did. Maybe the strongest warriors are not the ones who fight the hardest, but the ones who dare to show mercy. The storm may rage outside, but warmth begins with a single act of kindness. Sometimes, the person begging at your door doesn't need your gold. They need your humanity. And in giving it, you might just find your own. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that compassion is never wasted, that mercy is never foolish, and that the bonds we choose are sometimes stronger than the ones we're born into. What would you have done in Aldrich's position? Would you have opened the door? Let me know in the comments below. Remember, the world doesn't change through grand gestures. It changes when ordinary people make extraordinary choices, one frozen night at a time. Until next time, may you always have the courage to open your door, and may there always be someone willing to open theirs for you.